She crossed her legs slowly, a calculated movement that seemed effortless but carried the weight of centuries of unspoken feminine strategy. Across the marble table in that Florentine palazzo, a man who had commanded armies, negotiated treaties between warring city-states, and orchestrated the downfall of princes, found himself suddenly uncertain. Not because of what she said, but because of what she deliberately left unsaid. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and in that moment, power shifted invisibly from one side of the table to the other. This wasn't seduction in the crude sense that most men understand it. This was something far more sophisticated. A dance of dominance and submission where the roles seemed fixed but were actually in constant flux. The man, despite all his experience in the ruthless theater of Renaissance politics, had forgotten the most fundamental principle his mentor Niccolo Machiavelli had whispered to him years ago in a smoke-filled room. True power in relations between men and women has nothing to do with physical strength or social status, and everything to do with who controls the frame of reality itself. The woman stood up first, another seemingly innocent gesture that nevertheless established her as the one dictating the rhythm of their encounter. She moved toward the window overlooking the Arno River, where the golden light of late afternoon painted everything in shades of amber and shadow. The man watched her silhouette against that light, and in his watching, he had already surrendered something precious without realizing it. His attention, his focus, his mental energy, all of it now oriented around her movements, her presence, her next words. This is where most men lose before the game even begins. They believe power in romantic dynamics come from being aggressive, from pursuing, from demonstrating value through achievement or wealth or status. But these are the tools of amateurs, the desperate gambits of those who have never understood that real power operates on a completely different plane of existence. Machiavelli understood this in ways that would scandalize both the moralists of his time and ours. In his private letters, in the passages he dared not publish, in the conversations he had with trusted confidants after too much wine, he revealed a philosophy of sexual and romantic dynamics that was every bit as ruthless and pragmatic as his political theories. The prince who wishes to maintain power must understand that human nature operates according to certain immutable laws, regardless of what poets and priests might claim. And the man who wishes to maintain power in his intimate relationships must understand that women, contrary to the pedestals upon which society places them, are neither angels nor demons, but human beings who respond to specific psychological triggers with predictable consistency. This isn't misogyny. This is simply recognition of reality stripped of its romantic illusions. The fundamental error most men make is approaching women from a position of supplication. They believe they must earn female approval through demonstrations of worthiness, through jumping through hoops, through gradually accumulating enough good behavior points to unlock the achievement they desperately seek. This framework is poisonous because it establishes from the very first interaction that she is the prize and he is the contestant, that her approval is the currency of value, and his task is to convince her of his worth. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately as a catastrophic strategic blunder. You cannot negotiate from a position of weakness and expect favorable terms. You cannot frame yourself as needy and then wonder why you're treated as disposable. The entire architecture of the interaction must be constructed differently from the ground up, with you as a source of value rather than the supplicant begging for scraps of attention. But here's where it gets psychologically complex, where the crude understanding fails and only those who truly study human nature can proceed. The alternative to supplication is not domination in the brutish sense. It's not about being cruel or dismissive or playing games for their own sake. Those tactics work occasionally through sheer random chance, like a broken clock being right twice a day, but they're not sustainable strategies for those who understand the deeper mechanics at play. What Machiavelli would advocate, what he did advocate in his personal life with remarkable success, is something more subtle and infinitely more powerful. It's about becoming genuinely outcome independent, about creating a psychological frame where you are the center of your own universe, and her presence in that universe is welcome but not necessary. This isn't something you can fake. Women have spent millennia evolving exquisitely sensitive detection mechanisms for male neediness, because their survival depended on choosing mates who were genuinely high value rather than good actors. Your body language will betray you, your vocal tonality will expose you, the subtle desperation in your eyes when she threatens to leave will reveal the truth. So the work must be done at a level deeper than mere behavior modification. The woman by the window finally spoke, her voice carrying across the room with a quality that seemed designed to compel attention. She made a statement about the nature of power, something provocative and slightly dangerous, then fell silent again, waiting for a response. This is a test, though most men would never recognize it as such. She's not actually interested in his opinion on whatever topic she raised. She's interested in how he responds to the challenge implicit in her words. Will he rush to agree, demonstrating that her approval matters more to him than his own convictions? Will he defensively argue, revealing that his ego is fragile enough to be threatened by a woman's provocation? Or will he do something unexpected, something that reframes the entire interaction in a way that puts him back in control of the conversational flow? The man who understands Machiavellian principles knows that every interaction is a negotiation over whose frame of reality will dominate, and the person who controls the frame controls everything else that follows. Let's go deeper into the mechanisms, because surface-level understanding produces surface-level results. When Machiavelli wrote about maintaining power, he emphasized the importance of being both loved and feared, though he concluded that if you must choose, it's safer to be feared than loved. In romantic dynamics, this translates into something specific that most relationship advice gets catastrophically wrong. Women are attracted to men who generate emotional intensity, who make them feel something beyond the bland contentment of safe predictability. This is why the nice guy who does everything right often loses to the bad boy who does everything wrong. It's not that women prefer to be treated poorly, it's that intensity of emotion, even negative emotion, creates more attraction than the absence of emotion entirely. The man who can make a woman angry has more power than the man who makes her feel nothing at all. But the truly sophisticated strategy is to create positive emotional intensity, to be the source of excitement and unpredictability and adventure, while simultaneously being trustworthy in the ways that actually matter. This is the razor's edge that few men ever learn to walk. The conversation in that Florentine palazzo continued. Each exchanged a move in a game neither party explicitly acknowledged they were playing. And here's what separated this man from the countless others who had sat across from this particular woman. He understood that power in relationships, like power in politics, is largely perceptual. It exists because people believe it exists. The moment you start behaving as if you need her more than she needs you, that perception shifts and you've lost something that's nearly impossible to reclaim. But maintaining that perception requires more than just acting aloof or playing hard to get. It requires actually building a life so rich and purposeful that her presence genuinely is a bonus rather than the main event. This is why all effective relationship strategy ultimately points back to self-development. Not self-development for the purpose of attracting women, which would just be another form of supplication, but self-development for its own sake that makes you genuinely outcome independent as a side effect. Machiavelli's philosophy begins with a brutal recognition that most men are too weak to accept. The universe doesn't care about your feelings or your romantic fantasies or your belief that if you're just nice enough and patient enough, eventually you'll be rewarded with the relationship you desire. Reality operates according to power dynamics that have nothing to do with fairness or justice. Women are attracted to men who display markers of genetic fitness and social dominance because evolution built those preferences into female psychology over millions of years. You can complain about this reality, you can wish it were different, you can construct elaborate ideologies explaining why it shouldn't be this way, or you can accept it and learn to navigate it successfully. The choice is yours. But only one of those options leads to actual results in the real world, where real women make real decisions based on ancient psychological programming they themselves don't consciously understand. So what does gaining power over a woman actually mean in Machiavellian terms? It's not about control in the sense of domination or abuse. It's about becoming the person who sets the terms of the relationship, who establishes the frame, who is chosen rather than the one doing the choosing. It's about creating a dynamic where she works to maintain your interests rather than you working to maintain hers. And critically, it's about doing this in a way that makes her happier than she would be in the alternative, because relationships built on genuine mutual value rather than desperate clinging are better for everyone involved. This is a paradox that confuses moralists. The man who has options and is genuinely willing to walk away tends to be treated better than the man who has no options and will tolerate anything to avoid abandonment. The person who needs the relationship less has more power in the relationship, and that power differential actually creates more attraction and respect rather than less. This seems unfair until you realize that female attraction is triggered by perceptions of male value relative to other options, not by moral deservingness or the amount of effort invested. The light outside the window has shifted from gold to crimson, painting the room in shades of passion and danger. The woman turned back toward the man, and something in her expression had changed. The test had been passed, or perhaps a new test was beginning. In relationships, as in politics, the game never truly ends. There's no final victory that allows you to relax into comfortable mediocrity. The moment you stop maintaining the qualities that attracted her in the first place is the moment attraction begins its inevitable decline. Machiavelli understood that power is not a possession but a dynamic, not a trophy earned but a position constantly defended. The prince who believes he can rest on past achievements will soon find himself replaced by hungrier competitors. The man who believes his relationship is secure simply because of history or commitment or moral obligation will find himself bewildered when attraction fades and she begins looking elsewhere for the emotional intensity she's no longer finding at home. This brings us to perhaps the most important Machiavellian principle in romantic dynamics, the one that separates those who maintain passionate relationships for decades from those who watch desire die after the honeymoon phase ends. You must remain genuinely unpredictable in small ways while being utterly reliable in important ways. Most men get this exactly backward. They become boringly predictable in their daily routines, in their reactions, in their interests, essentially becoming a piece of furniture she barely notices. But then they're unreliable about important things, like commitment or honesty or following through on promises. This is the worst possible combination. What creates lasting attraction is the opposite. Be the man who shows up when he says he will, who keeps his word, who can be counted on when it matters, but also be the man who spontaneously suggests an adventure at midnight, who surprises her with something unexpected, who maintains interests and passions beyond the relationship that make you fundamentally interesting as a human being. Predictable reliability without excitement leads to dead bedrooms. Exciting unpredictability without reliability leads to broken relationships. The synthesis of both creates something powerful and rare. The conversation deepened as the evening progressed, moving from surface pleasantries to the kinds of truths people usually hide behind social masks. This is another element of power that Machiavelli would recognize immediately. The person willing to speak uncomfortable truth while everyone else trades in polite fictions gains a form of authority that's difficult to challenge. Women are drowning in men who tell them what they think they want to hear, who agree with everything, who mold themselves into whatever shape seems most likely to win approval. The man who is willing to disagree, to call out her rationalizations, to maintain his own frame even when it creates temporary friction, stands out as fundamentally different from the endless parade of supplicating males. This isn't about being disagreeable for its own sake, which is just another form of reactive behavior, where your actions are determined by trying to do the opposite of what's expected. It's about being genuinely self-directed, having your own beliefs and standards, and being willing to maintain them even when maintaining them is socially costly in the moment. Here's what most men miss about female psychology, and it's something Machiavelli understood about human nature in general. People don't value what they don't have to work for. This applies to relationships as much as anything else. The woman who has to invest effort, who has to pursue to some degree, who has to work to keep your attention, will value the relationship more than the woman for whom you're always available and always eager. This is why the advice to be less available actually works, though not for the reasons most people think. It's not about playing games or being manipulative. It's about the simple psychological reality that humans assign value based on scarcity and effort invested. If you're always there, always available, always eager to drop everything for her, you've signaled that your time and attention have low value because they're infinitely abundant. But if you have a genuinely full life with purposes and passions beyond the relationship, your time becomes scarce and therefore valuable. She has to compete with your other priorities for your attention, and that competition creates value in her mind. The strategic implications of this are profound. It means that the path to power in relationships runs directly through building a powerful life outside of relationships. Your mission, your purpose, your goals, and ambitions and interests must be genuine and important to you, independent of any woman's presence in your life. This is a foundation everything else is built upon. Without this, all the tactics and techniques in the world will fail because she'll sense, consciously or unconsciously, that you are just performing behaviors rather than living from a place of genuine abundance. With this foundation in place, many of the tactical concerns that obsess men in the dating sphere become irrelevant. Should you text back immediately or wait? It doesn't matter if you're genuinely busy with things that matter to you. Should you be available on Friday night or make her wait? It doesn't matter if you have a life full enough that sometimes you're busy and sometimes you're free based on what's actually happening rather than calculated game playing. Power in relationships, according to Machiavellian principles, comes from having genuine options and being genuinely willing to exercise them. This is the ultimate frame of abundance. It's not about threatening to leave or holding the relationship hostage or any of the crude manipulation tactics that angry men sometimes employ. It's about genuinely knowing at a deep level that if this relationship ended tomorrow, while it would be disappointing, your life will continue and you would eventually find something equal or better. This mindset is nearly impossible to fake because it manifests in thousands of micro behaviors and subtle communication patterns that women are exquisitely calibrated to detect. But when you actually embody this mindset, when you've done the work to build options and develop yourself to the point where you genuinely are a catch, the entire dynamic of your relationships transforms. You become the selector rather than the selected. You set standards and boundaries rather than accepting whatever you can get. And paradoxically, this makes you far more attractive than any amount of supplication or trying to prove your worth ever could. The woman in the palazzo said something that cut through the evening's conversation like a blade, a statement designed to test whether this man was truly different from the others or just better at pretending. She challenged something he'd claimed about himself, questioned his authenticity in a way designed to make him defensive. The amateur would have rushed to defend himself, to prove he was telling the truth, to seek her approval and validation. The man with Machiavellian understanding did something different. He smiled slightly, acknowledged her skepticism without needing to overcome it, and changed the subject entirely as if her approval of his truthfulness was irrelevant to him. This is the essence of frame control. She attempted to make her judgment of him the most important thing in the interaction, and he calmly refused to accept that frame, maintaining instead the frame where his own self-knowledge was sufficient regardless of her opinion. In that moment, power remained where he'd been carefully keeping it all evening, with him rather than her. Let's address something directly, because Machiavelli was nothing if not direct. These principles work, and they work consistently, and they work across cultures and time periods because they're based on fundamental aspects of human psychology that don't change with fashion or ideology. But with that effectiveness comes responsibility. The tools of power can be used to build relationships that enhance both people's lives or to manipulate and exploit. Machiavelli himself would say that ethics are downstream from effectiveness, that you must first understand how to achieve power and only then can you choose how to use it. The man who lacks power cannot afford to be moral because he'll be crushed by those who understand power better. But the man who has power can choose to use it generously or cruelly, and that choice defines his character. In romantic relationships, this means using your understanding of female psychology to create dynamics that make both of you happier and more fulfilled, not to exploit vulnerabilities for selfish gain. The night deepened outside the plaza windows, and the conversation took on the quality of two people genuinely seeing each other rather than maintaining social masks. This is actually the goal of all effective relationship strategy, though many men miss this point entirely. The power dynamics and strategic understanding aren't ends in themselves. They're means to create the space where genuine connection becomes possible. When you're desperate and needy and operating from scarcity, you can't be authentic because you're too busy trying to say and do whatever you think will work. But when you have genuine power in the interaction, when you're operating from abundance and outcome independence, you can finally relax into authenticity because you don't need any particular outcome. This is the ultimate paradox. You gain the ability to connect genuinely only by first becoming the kind of person who doesn't need connection to feel complete. Machiavelli's core insight applies perfectly here. It's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, but the ideal is to be both. In romantic relationships, this translates to being simultaneously the man she feels safe with and the man who excites her, the reliable partner and the unpredictable adventure, the person who provides comfort and the person who creates intensity. Most men can do one or the other, but not both simultaneously. They're either the exciting bad boy who can't be trusted or the reliable nice guy who generates no passion. The sophisticated strategy is to integrate both qualities into a coherent identity, to be trustworthy about the things that matter while remaining genuinely unpredictable in ways that create positive emotional intensity, to provide security without becoming boring, to create excitement without becoming unstable. The practical application of these principles requires understanding that relationships progress through stages, and the power dynamics shift across those stages. In the beginning, when everything is new and uncertain, the person who cares less has more power. This is why being outcome independent and genuinely having options matters so much in early interactions. But as relationships deepen and commitment increases, different dynamics come into play. The person who has invested less has more power, becomes less true, and the person who provides more value has more power, becomes more relevant. This is why men who rely solely on creating artificial scarcity without building genuine value eventually lose relationships to men who are actually high value in sustainable ways. You can create attraction through unpredictability and outcome independence, but you maintain relationships through consistently being worth staying with. The woman stood to leave, the evening having reached some natural conclusion that both of them sensed without it needing to be spoken. But before she left, she paused at the door and looked back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Respect, certainly. Interest, definitely. But also something else. Something that suggested the dynamic between them had been permanently established in this single evening in ways that would echo through whatever relationship developed from here. He had demonstrated through 1,000 subtle choices in how he responded and what he prioritized and what he communicated through behavior rather than words, that he understood the game being played and knew how to play it at a level most men never reach. This is what gaining power over a woman actually means in practice. Not control in the crude sense, but the establishment of a dynamic where you are valued and pursued and treated with the respect that comes from being genuinely high value rather than merely claiming to be. Everything we've discussed points toward a single fundamental truth that Machiavelli understood in politics and applies equally to romantic relationships. Power flows to those who understand reality clearly and act accordingly, not to those who wish reality were different and act based on how things should be rather than how they are. Female attraction operates according to specific psychological principles. Relationships develop according to predictable patterns. Human nature contains both noble and selfish impulses, and denying the selfish impulses doesn't make them disappear. It just makes you blind to them. The man who wants power in his romantic life must first accept these realities without moral judgment, must study them as objectively as a scientist studies natural phenomena, and must then develop strategies that work with human nature rather than against it. The path forward is clear. for those willing to walk it. Build a life so compelling that a woman's presence in it is a bonus rather than the main event. Develop genuine options through self-improvement and social expansion. Learn to maintain frame and outcome independence not through artificial tactics, but through actually having abundant alternatives. Understand the psychological principles that drive attraction and use them ethically to create relationships that benefit everyone involved. Become the man who is chosen rather than the man who chases. And perhaps most importantly, recognize that all of this is in service of something beyond mere power for its own sake. The goal is to create the conditions where genuine love and connection become possible, because genuine connection can only occur between equals, and you can only be equal to a high-value woman by becoming a high-value man yourself. This is the Machiavellian path in relationships, stripped of moral pretense, but ultimately in service of something moral, based on clear-eyed understanding of reality rather than comfortable illusions, ruthlessly pragmatic in its methods, but capable of creating outcomes that are better for everyone involved than the alternative. The question isn't whether these principles work, because they do. The question is whether you have the courage to apply them, to let go of comforting fantasies about how relationships should work, and embrace the sometimes harsh truths about how they actually work. The man in the palazzo understood this. The question is whether you will. Now you understand something that most men will never grasp in their entire lives. You've been given a framework for understanding power dynamics in relationships that comes from one of history's greatest strategists, adapted for modern romantic reality, but fundamentally unchanged in its core insights. What you do with this knowledge determines everything. You can ignore it, retreat back into comforting illusions about nice guys finishing first and just being yourself being enough. Or you can accept the responsibility that comes with understanding, the burden of seeing reality clearly and acting accordingly, even when it's uncomfortable or socially unpopular. The choice has always been yours. It will always be yours. But now at least you're making an informed choice, rather than stumbling blindly through relationship dynamics you don't understand, wondering why the same painful patterns keep repeating in your romantic life. The palazzo stands empty now, the conversation long finished, but the principles discussed in that room echo across centuries, from Machiavelli's Florence to your present moment. Power in relationships isn't mystical or complicated once you understand it. It's about value and options and frame and outcome independence and all the practical realities we've discussed. But understanding intellectually and embodying behaviorally are different things entirely. The work ahead of you is to close that gap, to become the kind of man these principles describe rather than just someone who knows about them theoretically. That work is difficult and uncomfortable and requires confronting truths about yourself you've probably been avoiding. But it's also the only path to the kind of relationships you actually want rather than the ones you settle for out of scarcity and desperation. So here's where we stand at the end of this journey through Machiavellian relationship dynamics. You know the principles now. You understand the framework. You've seen how power operates in romantic relationships when stripped of comforting illusions and examined objectively. The only question that remains is what you'll do with this knowledge. Will you apply it, stumbling at first, but gradually integrating these insights into your behavior until they become natural? Or will you file this away as interesting information that doesn't require any uncomfortable change on your part? That choice determines whether your relationships remain stuck in the same frustrating patterns, or whether they transform into something closer to what you actually want. Machiavelli would tell you that knowledge without action is worthless, that understanding power dynamics without using that understanding to improve your position is a waste. The principles don't care about your feelings or your fears or your resistance to change. They simply describe reality, and reality will continue operating according to these principles whether you accept them or not. If this knowledge has created even a spark of recognition in you, if you can see how these principles have been operating invisibly in your past relationships and current romantic life, then you are already further along the path than most men will ever get. But recognition without action leads nowhere. Take this understanding and commit to embodying it. Build a life that makes you genuinely outcome independent. Develop the options that create authentic abundance rather than artificial scarcity tactics. Learn to maintain frame, not through manipulation, but through actually being the centered, valuable man that these principles describe. The journey is long and the work is hard, but the alternative is remaining stuck in dynamics where you lack power and wonder why respect and attraction keep eluding you despite your best intentions. If you found value in this deep dive into Machiavellian relationship dynamics, do me a favor, smash that like button to tell the algorithm this content matters. Subscribe to this channel because we're going deeper into the psychology of power, attraction, and human nature in ways that most people are too afraid to discuss honestly. Drop a comment below sharing your biggest takeaway or the principle that hit hardest for you, and share this video with that one friend who needs to hear these truths even if they don't know they need them yet. The knowledge contained here has the power to transform your relationships and your life, but only if you engage with it seriously rather than treating it as entertainment. This channel exists to give you the unfiltered truth about human dynamics that society would prefer you never understand. If that mission resonates with you, if you value clarity over comfort and effectiveness over ideology, then you're exactly the kind of person this community is built for. I'll see you in the next video where we go even deeper into the psychology of power and the strategic principles that separate those who understand reality from those who wish it were different. Until then, remember that power in relationships, like power in all things, flows to those who understand how the game is actually played rather than how they wish it were played. Now go build the life that makes these principles natural rather than forced, and watch how everything else falls into place.